Good morning or good afternoon, depending on when you're watching this. My name is Alexa Warner and I'm the director of the Healthful Mind Clinic that has recently opened in Wimborne Town Centre. And with me today, because April is IBS Awareness Month, so to bring some focus on how you can manage your digestive issues through both mind and body work, I have Deborah from Eat Well to Live Well. She's a nutritionist and I will hand over to her to introduce herself.
Hi, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depends. I'm Deborah Stocks. I qualified as a nutritional therapist back in 2012, having spent many years struggling with gut issues, and was given the umbrella diagnostic from my GP of IBS. So I went through all sorts of issues. I tried lots of different alternatives, and the decision was I needed to re-educate myself. I needed to learn what I needed to do to help make my health better. So I studied and I went and got a degree in nutritional therapy. So now when a client comes to me and they've been given the umbrella diagnostic of IBS, I'm pretty well equipped to help them find a solution to getting them back to health.
It's an interesting term, IBS, isn't it? Because I was looking at the research on the various different scales that they look at, and depending on which study they're referring the client to, depends on the symptoms that they're getting. And the symptoms are quite wide, from it could be diarrhea dominant, it can be constipation dominant, it can be equal measure of both, but it includes things like getting mucus in the stools and gas and bloating. And I too was diagnosed with IBS when I was a teenager, so a long time, and I still do have some gut issues. I do need to have a chat with Deborah personally, I think. Don't always practice what we preach. But I have the diagnosis as well of SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and which is, I mean, it crosses over very closely. But if I say the bottom line is that a lot of it is about the way that the gut is functioning. So IBS is a functional bowel disorder. And the diagnosis really comes, doesn't it, from not having any physiological disease or a fault there. So like hiatus hernia and things like that, if that's why someone is getting acid reflux. But so it's really difficult then for the person that's been diagnosed. They usually get this sense of relief. Okay, so I've got a diagnosis. I now know how to deal with it. But they don't know how to deal with it until they really learn what actually is going on, not just in their gut, but also in their whole body, in their nervous system, in their mind. And so, Deborah, would you like to tell us the process that you take someone through when they come to you with IBS?
Yes, of course. Just quickly touching on that, I had a conversation the other day with a GP. I work a lot with clients' GPs, and we had a conversation about this the other day. And they openly admit they're limited. You know, they'll go for colonoscopies, they'll do endoscopies. We'll check for celiac disease. Most people are coming with, as you say, a variety of symptoms, and they say we fail them. If once we've done those investigative works, and there's no cancer, so there's no polyps, there's no inflammatory bowel disease, they just hand them back and say, well, you've got to manage it. So that's usually when a client comes to see me. So the starting point will be a full health questionnaire, and I ask a lot of information about their health throughout their whole life. And if we can go back to conception and know about their pregnancy for their mother, that's even bigger help for me, because it gives me a real indication of what's been going on in the body. I was trained in what's called functional medicine. So when I look at what's going on and I see symptomology, I reverse back into the body and say, well, what function's not working properly? And we have 9 functions within the body. And quite often under IBS, 5 or 6 of those won't be functioning properly. but they're all interlinked together. So if one's not functioning, chances are it's having an impact elsewhere. The biggest impact I find with most people through their life health is stress, whether that's a physical stress through surgery, injuries, etc., or emotional stress. So whether they've been through things through their puberty, through their childhood, through their teens, and even latter years. I've had people come to me with IBS or health digestive issues, and they've been through divorce recently or work situations. So most of them are what I would call an emotional stress. So I would be looking at all of that history and see where the symptoms started. I do have a couple of in-house tests I do, which are very simple, but most people I send for a stool test, because what is able to be assessed from our stool is incredible. As you talk about SIBO, the small intestine bacterial overgrowth, if I get a stool test now, the testing now is incredible. I can see what bacteria is living in your gut. So a lot of people will go and buy their probiotics off the shelf. They'll have their probiotic yogurts. And we know we've got a lot of research with some of the basic ones, so bifidobacteria and things like that. But we could be having too many of those good ones too.
Yeah, certainly with SIBO.
Yeah, so we need to look at which ones are working and functioning properly and which ones aren't. And a stool test is the best way of us finding out what's going on, because we need to be targeted. Just a broad spectrum bacteria probiotic could be feeding, even though they're good bacteria, feeding those that are already overpopulated. We need to have a balance. That's important.
Yeah.
So that would be the first starting point. And once we've got the results, we can then have a targeted approach on what's needed for that client. So whether there is supplements needed, whether there is a probiotic, but it could be one strain rather than 5 or 6 strains. And there's a lot now in the supplement industry where they are realizing that actually we need to be more targeted. And we also look at how people are digesting their food. A stool test will help us look at whether they've got sufficient enzymes and whether they've got all the enzymes, whether they're functioning properly. The stool test also gives us a really good idea of how well the liver's functioning and whether they're producing sufficient bile, whether they are breaking down hormones, whether they're breaking down medication. All of that comes through the stool. So there's an awful lot that I get in my answers from a stool test that makes it a lot easier.
And that stops people going through the trial and error stage, doesn't it? Because most people have tried a lot of things, but even before they end up at a doctor's surgery, they've tried numerous diets. So for instance, like the FODMAP, anti-inflammatory diets, all sorts of things. But when you start restricting things and playing around with it, if it's done blind, if you like taking, there's a lot of publicity now about gut health and eating foods like the yogurts or the probiotics, the live drinks and things like that. Kombucha, not sambuca, that's an alcohol drink. No, don't drink that one. But yeah, so for someone like me, I found, well, I didn't understand why that just made me so much worse. But it's because if you don't know this information, then how can you possibly treat it? You risk depriving yourself of vital nutrients, or you risk exacerbating the problem by eating the very thing that is overgrowing in there. So
it goes back to your first statement of IBS. It's an umbrella term because the symptomology could be quite varied. You know, one person could come to me who is desperately constipated, and the next person comes in who's got severe diarrhea, gastric reflux, all sorts of problems. And you can't diagnose when you've got the symptomology that's so varied. And those symptoms, so for instance, diarrhea, could be lots of different aspects going on. It might not actually be a digestive issue. There could be something completely different happening as to why we've got diarrhea. The nervous system has an impact on it. Our immune system has an impact on it. But it could be the liver's not functioning properly. So that one symptom doesn't necessarily point to one thing. That's why when I look at it and I look at the function, I will look at all of these 9 things. And one of the parts of my questionnaire asks lots of little questions, and people say, oh, there's lots of these questions, what are they all about? And I said, well, if you think about your car, or it's probably more of an aeroplane because they have a lot more lights on them, but all these different lights flashing, they're usually telling you something's going on and you've got to monitor it. And so I say to people with symptomology, they could have brittle nails, they could have dry hair, their skin. These to me are all little things, all little warning signs that say to me, there's a lot in that box. There's a lot more going on with that function than that. So we need to, and we look at the whole thing. But it's a question.
You mentioned earlier 2 things actually that jumped to my awareness, which was one, hormones, and I certainly personally found that around the time of my periods, it was always so much worse, either one way or the other. And also you said about surgery, and I do believe that the statistics on IBS coming after any kind of abdominal or gynecological surgery are quite high. I mean, obviously, not only have you had your insides altered and mucked around with, but I think the actual nervous system stress from having had that kind of an impact. So also things like car crashes have been found to then trigger irritable bowel syndrome. And you could think, well, it's gone. Why is it still happening now? And this refers to something that I talk about quite a lot, about how the body holds the score. So that's a book by Bessel van der Kolk, if anybody of you have heard that before. But when anything happens to us, it's like our body remembers it. And if it's a high nervous system, sympathetic nervous system activity, then it can create all sorts of chaos afterwards, because all the while the body hasn't, or the mind hasn't resolved that, it can create, in particular, things like diarrhea. Because I think we're all aware that when we get nervous, that you're more likely to go into that activation than the constipation. But something else actually, which has shocked me recently from a number of clients that I've had, is how people accept constipation. I think we don't accept diarrhea because it's so inconvenient, but constipation, people, oh, it's normal. Yeah, I go once every 2 weeks or something. It's like, really? And if you think that that's like, if you had a drain that only emptied every 2 weeks, all those toxins. So again.
And that's what I try and get people to understand is when I'm in that consultation and I do in talks when I give lectures and that, and I get people to understand the digestive pathway, what goes on and what infiltrates in and what goes back out. You can understand if that's sat there, you've got lots of things happening, and a lot of those recycle back. So going back to hormones, people that come to me, as you say, 2-3 days, that's normal, a week normal, 2 weeks normal, all those hormones go back into the system. Why we're seeing a lot more PCOS for young girls, PCOS, it's incredible, and most of it is all to do with our digestion, definitely.
That can cause hair thinning as well, can't it? And again,
estrogen just gets recycled. Estrogen is a big problem. And a simple thing like that.
So one reason why Deborah and I work well together is because she can tell you exactly what's going on in your digestive system and help you rectify that. And I can deal with the mind. So hypnotherapy is probably its most researched area, apart from going back to things like anesthesia and pain relief, is irritable bowel syndrome. And it is actually the only area that private health insurance companies will cover hypnotherapy for. But there's a catch on that. They'll only cover it if it's performed by a gastroenterologist. But most gastroenterologists don't spend their time learning hypnosis. Hypnotherapists.
Odd exclusion.
So one reason why hypnotherapy works for any kind of gut disorder is because of this nervous system balance. And when anybody is struggling with any kind of gut disorder, it's never just that, is it? The impact that that has on their lives. In fact, I had a guy the other day who wants to go out dating again. He's been single for some time and he'd like to go back onto the dating scene, but he feels he can't because of his IBS. Now, most of the time it doesn't bother him that much, but he's thinking, oh, well, you know, sometimes when I eat certain things, I get really gassy and I can't be in the company of a woman letting all that gas out. It's a bit of a taboo subject. And then he thinks about it and he imagines the pain and the bloating it's going to cause. And I've had that as well, particularly with stressed out business women. I think women on the whole, more than men, are embarrassed by their gut function, but it stops them maybe even putting themselves out there for promotion and things like that because of the thought of being in certain situations, maybe having to travel, staying in hotels, maybe not so relevant now, but to be even in a meeting for any length of time when your gut is in a lot of pain and there's a lot of wind, and it's like it's completely affecting their emotional state as well as their physical state, and then, you know, their careers as well. And so the statistics are that with hypnotherapy, the improvement is like 70 to 90%. Now, medication is like 20 to 30%. So with figures like that, you'd think that it would by now be becoming more standard to give people a 6 to 8 week course of hypnotherapy to not just lessen that nervous system response, but really it's been found to lessen the visceral sensitivity. So for anybody that doesn't know what that is, it's the feelings that you get inside of your body. And they found that people with IBS feel things more. So when there is wind in your gut, you would feel it more than the person without IBS, or the need to go to the toilet, that you feel that more. And you might have visceral sensitivity in other areas as well. So, but basically, if you are feeling things more, that also can be changed by using hypnotherapy. They've measured it. I think they stick probes in various places and measure how much you can feel things. And yeah, so there is so much that can be changed using the mind, but it is also essential to get the function working as best it could. It's a bit like finely tuning a car and then filling it with the wrong fuel.
Yeah, exactly. But it's a perpetuating problem. Chances are the IBS came about through stress and through issues with the mind. And if that could have been dealt with before it created the physical problems, then they probably wouldn't have IBS. But we all have those. We all have times of anxiety, and that's a very normal process. And the majority of the people, when they come to me with IBS, is because it's become chronic.
Yes.
And the acute side of it is absolutely normal. We all know what it's like to get butterflies when you're excited, or when you're a little bit nervous because you're maybe going to give a talk or an interview on Zoom. We all have those sensations, and they're very, very normal. But when they're constant, because there's a fear behind them, that's when the physiological starts to change, because the body's not designed to run on a fight and flight fuel basis for very long. And that has to adapt. And our adrenals have to change what hormones it's producing to deal with chronic stress. And that change has all sorts of physiological problems from that. So again, if we don't ultimately deal with what's going on in the mind, coming to me and dealing with the IBS, yes, we will deal with a lot of the physical, which will help because we will alleviate a lot of those problems and maybe educate them and understand why they're still getting some of the symptoms, because they are fearful of it. But the two have to work very much hand in hand. So I think as we said, you know, us overlapping with each other, I think is going to be a great combination for anybody struggling with IBS, is to really come and learn and understand about food and how their body uses it and what it's all about, but also how they're influencing that by not dealing with how they're feeling and thinking and their thought processes. So
yeah, and the statistics are that about 20% of the population have or have had IBS. So, you know, it's something, it's not talked about. Had a chat with a lady the other day that talks about menopause in the workplace. And I said, oh, well, I should go and do some talks about wind in the workplace, because that's not talked about. But it is, you know, it's a natural function. We all have digestive systems, and yet the amount of embarrassment and tension and anxiety the function of it can cause that, you know, IBS, this is IBS month. So I think it's great that there's a whole month of people becoming more aware of it. But I would say I haven't heard of a great deal of publicity about it either. So I think people are still reticent. But we're very gentle, aren't we? So if anybody wants to come and talk to us about their bowel habits, we're very keen to listen. We do understand, because we have both been through it both ourselves. So we completely understand where you're coming from and how that can be affecting you. We offer joint packages, and from June there will be some group classes as well. But at the moment, because of the COVID situation, we are on one-to-one sessions. We're based in Wimborne. Deborah works out of her home, which is only about a mile or two, isn't it, down the road from the clinic. So yeah, if you want to come and talk to us, then call the clinic number, which is posted up at the end of this video, and we'll have a chat with you first and do a free consultation. But before we go, Deborah, would you like to say anything else before we turn off the recording?
No, I hope that people, you know, do take time to think about what's going on in their own bodies, being a lot more aware. You know, we're not aware of our bodies a lot of the time, and I think we need to be aware. And if something's not working, not functioning properly, maybe we need to ask some questions. And you know, there's plenty of experts out there, but you know, us two working together, I think we can maybe find the answers for them.
Absolutely, fantastic. So thank you very much, and yeah, subscribe to the YouTube channel and you will see more videos like this on all sorts of subjects. So thank you for watching.